What does it really mean to lead without losing yourself?
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Before we jump into the episode, remember to join our mailing list at jlinsiders.com. Every Saturday, we send out an exclusive video only to our mailing list, along with other templates, resources, videos, and much, much more. We also share upcoming events and opportunities you may not hear about anywhere else. Go to jlinsiders.com to become part of the JL Insider community.
Welcome to another episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration. I'm Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Lorna Hewson. We're joined today by Dominic George, a leadership strategist, executive coach, and author of The Authentic Edge, Leading Without Losing Yourself. With more than 20 years of experience in both corporate and nonprofit leadership, Dominic has led high-impact teams, driven culture transformation initiatives, and coached executives across industries.
As the founder and CEO of Vision Leadership for Life, Dominic now helps leaders reclaim their voice, build influence without losing identity, and lead systems change from within. His work is rooted in the idea that authenticity isn't just personal, it's a powerful leadership strategy. We're so looking forward to this conversation on how authenticity and collaboration go hand in shaping stronger, more sustainable leadership cultures. Welcome, Dominic. Great to be able to have you join us for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so excited to jump into this conversation, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited for everything that we're going to dive into today.
So glad you're here.
Isn't it always fun to just kind of sit there smiling as someone's going through the introduction?
All of that.
Yes, and thank you. Yeah, I've been really excited about all the ways in which you all are showing up on your podcast and impacting the world. So I'm excited to be in collaboration today.
Well, you know what? Let's start right there because I love the statement you had shared with us that collaboration without clarity is chaos. Collaboration without trust is theater. When I saw that, I went, ooh, I really want to get into
Love
unpacking
to talk more about that.
Unpack that for us, Dominic, and share with us. We'd love to hear how you first came to some of these realizations in your own leadership journey.
Yeah, I would say that the center point of all of my leadership, whether it's the trajectory of just starting or where I am today, has been centered around people and collaboration. And I would say that that's where I get all of my both my inspiration, my vision of how do we move forward as a collective and organization, and just how to support people as they're going through their own trajectory. And it's why I always center people in all of my leadership strategies.
Awesome. So break down first for us. When you say collaboration without clarity is chaos, what do you mean by that? And what does it look like when that's happening in an organization?
Yeah, so I often what I love about organizations is there are so many different phases of development, and my favorite part tends to be the earlier phases of organizations between that startup and midpoint of moving towards a stable organization. But in that earlier part of development, what I find is that you have a lot of energy, a lot of ideas on how to move a company. And often in those spaces, you have a bunch of leaders and not enough individuals who are willing to step aside and actually just be led. And it's the fun part, but it's also the chaotic part of leadership. And so when I think about the statement that you just raised, I often think that it takes an extraordinary leader to truly lead people towards a vision of clarity. And if you're not willing to step in and be that leader who is going to provide clarity in the questions, clarity in the confusion, clarity in the chaos, then you're ultimately going to be led in multiple different directions. And it takes one extraordinary leader to really centralize ideas and help people not only feel seen and valid, validated in their idea of what leadership is, but to
Mhm.
also be inclusive in what that means in order to prevent chaos. Because everyone wants their ideas to be valid. Everyone wants their ideas to be heard. And what I've learned is that when you're the leader who can actually sit with people, listen to them, and actually see their idea to a point that it could be, then you will be that leader that people listen to. And I think that prevents the chaos.
Yeah.
That's
We
beautiful.
hear this all the time when we're talking with guests on the show, the idea of clarity.
Yeah.
Just how can you collaborate if you don't have that clarity? But we also love that idea, and let's go there next, that collaboration without trust is theater. Break
Mm-hmm.
that down for us. I love that statement.
Yeah. Collaboration without trust is theater. Often, what I've seen in the workplace, especially when I'm leading executives, leading those individuals who are in those mid-level positions trying to get into senior level leadership, is they're often replicating some version of leadership that they've seen either from afar
Yeah.
or read about or studied.
Yeah.
And we know that research is great and studying is great, but when you're actually in it, it looks a little different when you're actually working with people. And so what I've seen in early leaders is they're often replicating someone else's leadership by no fault of their own, because oftentimes people are learning how to lead as they're going,
Mhm.
and there's no real instructional, there's no real manual to be the greatest leader that you can be. Of course, there's
Mhm.
coaching and there's direction that you could follow in order to get there, but there's no centralized manual. And so what I've seen is that people are often replicating some other leader style that they admire and desire to be, but it often turns theatrical because you can't be somebody else. You
Mhm.
can only be yourself in leadership. You can only be yourself in a leadership position. And the quicker you get to that understanding, in my experience, the clearer your leadership will be. And so when I think about collaboration, um, and getting to a place where it's not theatrical. What I often coach young leaders and leaders who have been in spaces for long periods of time, truly step into that leadership role and be yourself, because anything outside of that is going to be a performance. It's going to be theatrical, and people are going to do that in a way where trust is going to be broken. It's
Mhm.
there's no question. If you're not stepping into a place where you're authentically yourself as a leader, your people will see through that. And no matter how you try to recover or redirect, if you're not truly being centered on who you are as an individual and leading from your edge as a leader, then it's going to become theatrical and it's going to ultimately break trust. And there's ways around that, but that's sort of my breakdown of show up as yourself when you're leading.
Dominic, it right away makes me think about how some people are told as new teachers that you shouldn't smile for the first 6 months because you're trying to set the tone in your classroom, right? When for that we know that that's not valuable information, but
Yes.
that idea of being yourself and leading, whether that's in a classroom or whether that's a school or even at a school division, leading from that place of authenticity.
Well,
Mhm.
and it makes me think too, Dominic, that it takes a little bit of confidence as a leader to actually be okay being imperfect.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
right,
Yeah.
knowing that we're going to make mistakes, I'll communicate that out, but we'll keep moving towards that vision, that clarity that you've talked about. So let's get into the weeds on some how.
Yeah.
We know that safety is critically important. It's a precursor. You talk about that as
Yes.
a precursor to strategy. So leaders walking into an environment, let's say an environment where trust has been broken,
Mhm.
or maybe didn't even exist to begin with. What do you see as some of the first steps to building that foundation of safety? How does a leader go
Mhm.
about doing that?
Yeah, and it's such a great question and an inviting space for leaders to really build upon.
Yeah.
Um, I love that example of not smiling and setting the tone right, because there's so many different nuances and ways that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And
For
so
sure.
a small few where it could go right. But really, the smile is the invitation, right? And same thing when safety, right? You want to welcome people in the space where they feel comfortable enough to be themselves at every point of a journey. Because when I think about i.e. psychological safety in the workplace or just safety and leadership, I'm really creating opportunities for people to feel safe enough to state their idea,
Mm-hmm.
push back on a thought or a process that they don't see as the direction forward, and to have a honest dialogue around how do you take what you see as a gap and what I see as a direction we collaborate to really create a solution where everyone gets to win. That's my version of the ultimate environment of psychological safety, of safety and leadership, where freedom to voice their vision in a way that moves the culture forward, not with harm, but
Yeah.
in a way that pushes back enough that you get to question, is what I'm saying the best possible way forward, or is there another way? And I don't think enough organizations create that space where people feel free enough to challenge ideas and create new visions so that we all get to win.
Yeah,
I
I love that idea because when we think of true collaboration, it is about being able to surface things that could be getting in our way of our progress.
yeah.
But we have to be able to be open enough to bring up issues and bring up concerns and feel safe enough that
Mhm.
our team is going to be accepting of that and that we're going to be able to work through those ideas together. But it takes that level of trust and psychological safety to really move that
And
forward.
I'm sure you see this in your work, Dominic, of, people reaching a place of being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if we're truly being collaborative as a leader, I should be inviting people in with questions like, where do you see a problem here?
Yeah.
How would you challenge the thinking that we've put in place? Like you said, opening that opportunity, making it really explicit to give entry points for people to disagree, to share a differing viewpoint. And again, it will be uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
that's actually really valuable for us organizationally.
Yeah, and I think that's really where we learn, right? Where we get
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and really step out of our comfort zone so that we could think of those new ideas, think of that new direction. Because I believe when you're stagnant and you're in your zone of comfort or your element of control, that you often can't see the new pathways forward. Why we're always thinking about innovation and ways to grow. It's really about stepping outside of your comfort zone. So I love that synopsis there.
Yeah, that's so awesome. You make a powerful distinction between performing teamwork and practicing teamwork. What does that look like in real world settings? And how can leaders help their teams to shift from one to the other?
Yeah, so there's this idea of practicing versus performing, right?
Yeah.
And when I think about authentic leadership, again, it's about showing up as who you are in every single space. It's about empowering others around members, your colleagues, your peers to really show up in an authentic way so that you get to provide the real-time feedback. You get to share in the leadership wins and losses together. But when I think about the performing versus the practice, what I talk about is it's really that idea of I make this distinction for leaders of who are you when you look in the mirror versus who are you when you're into spaces where everyone has eyes on you.
Mm,
And I coin those things as the mirror versus the mask, right? So
yeah.
when we and we get ready however you choose to get ready, right? You're looking in that mirror and you're either saying things that are positive reinforcements for yourself, or you're saying things that are not so caring and loving and tends to be on the negative side of who you are. But either way, you're saying something to yourself, and those are your honest thoughts in the moment, and that's how you're going to show. When you walk into spaces where you're not so and I coined this the mask, and sometimes we have to put on a mask in order to show up and perform in the workspace. Um, and you get to choose when you take that off versus when you put it on. Ideally, you're in the mirror space more often than the mask. But when you have that mask on, it's who you think people want to see when you show up versus who you actually are. And when I think about the distinction between performing leadership and practicing it, um, performing is when you show up in the mass. Performing is that idea that you're playing leadership in order to shift the needle just so far so that you are surviving in the room, versus when you're practicing leadership, you're actually in it. You're in it with the people. You're showing up as your authentic self. You're being the mirror from the morning you wake up all the way through the day that you check out of work. And I believe that practicing leadership is the wave of the future, where you're actually showing up authentically as yourself and you're in it with everybody else, right? You said earlier that we're all learning on this plane of leadership and this journey for society. And the more we get to practice that together, I think the better for the organizations that we work with, the environment that we're serving, the people that are our clients. But the more you're able to practice that, I believe that you show up authentically as a leader and you empower others become those leaders that show up authentically as themselves.
I want to dig in some more to this authentic. You refer to it as an authentic edge framework. Is that correct, Dominic?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So from that in your book, you're talking about aligning performance with purpose. Can you walk us through what are some of the key moves that you see in that authentic edge framework, and how you can or how can you help leaders design more authentic collaboration?
Yeah. So in my book, The Authentic Edge, Leading Without Losing Yourself, um, I talk about how to really build high performing teams. And I think you do that not by avoiding conflict, but
Yeah.
by actually stepping in and addressing the conflict head on. What I find is that when you're building these high performing teams and you're creating these spaces where people get to show up authentically, you're creating space where conflict sharpens clarity and not just trust. What I mean by that is when you are in a space where you're showing up authentically, you not only get to be yourself in that environment, but you really get to show up in a way that allows others to step in themselves. And what I believe in the space of collaboration, again, going back to that performing teamwork versus practicing it, you really get an opportunity to create something special when you show up as yourself.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do it enough. And so one of those initial things that I coach people through is when you're sitting in a meeting with your team, um, truly be in that listening seat. Truly be in a space where you're able to really hear what is really happening. What are people saying? What are they not saying in the room? What are people's body language doing? And really be in the space of truly listening as a leader, able to hear everyone's voice. That idea of practicing leadership, when you're sitting with your people and you're in it with them, you're actually listening in and you're taking in the information. And so one of the first steps that I coach leaders around, when they're practicing this leadership in this authentic edge of showing up as yourself without losing yourself, is to ask the tough questions that nobody is willing to ask. When you're listening to everyone and you're taking it in, think about the questions that no one's willing to ask, or think about the conflict that no one is willing to address, and actually just put it on the. When you're able to do that, I think that's when you break through the barrier of collaboration and it becomes less of a performance and theatrics, and it actually becomes.
Well, and I really, yeah, agree with that idea that if as a leader you're not showing and modeling that for people, how would you ever expect the rest of the team to start identifying conflict?
Yeah.
Like I think it was Patrick Lencioni that said, as a leader, you have to be willing to go first,
Yeah.
Yes.
model what this looks like, and then created as expectation that we don't just identify conflict, we look for it. We
Yeah,
find where the
agreed.
I think people know too when you're not authentic and when you are performing as opposed to coming to the table as yourself. And
Hmm.
when you come in that artificial role, then you can't build that trust
yeah.
because people understand what's
Yeah.
going on and will hold back. And really, when we engage in effective collaboration, we want that environment to be open and
Mm.
honest so that we can face hard questions.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think it's about belonging, right? When you can
Yeah.
create that space of belonging, um, because you're right, people will see that and they will call it out often if you're not
Yeah.
being yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's about modeling, but also creating that place of belonging so that you get to build that trust along the way.
I was really interested, Dominic, in we always ask our guests to share some potential topics or discussions, and you talked about working with some leaders in high stake roles, and I'd love for you to describe what that has looked like in your experience. You noted that in those situations, there's pressure to collaborate in ways that can actually
Mhm.
add hidden
Mhm.
emotional labor. Can you discuss what you mean by that and how can leaders then model that authentic collaboration while still protecting their own identity and
Mhm.
energy? We'll be right back to continue this episode. Are your norms truly having an impact on your team's success? Teams create norms to guide collaboration, but how often do they stop to reflect on them? The Unpacking Team Norms Workshop Guide gives your team the opportunity to assess, refine, and reinforce norms to maximize effectiveness. For just $9, you'll get a ready to use facilitation guide for a 20 to 30 minute team reflection, a customizable Unpacking Team Norms template, and a step-by-step instructions for assessing and refining your norms. In addition, there are numerous strategies that are shared that will help to reinforce and update norms as needed. Don't let ineffective norms hold your team back. Download the Unpacking Team Norms Guide today for just $9 by searching under the Resource tab for the Collaborative Leaders Toolkit at jigsawlearning.ca. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, I would love to dive into that. What I who I often work with is Black leaders who are in mid-level positions looking to go into senior level roles and make as much impact as they can while building teams in extraordinary ways. And so something that I this and experience in my leadership, and it's why I coach others on how to navigate those spaces, is the emotional labor of leadership.
Mm.
And it happens in many different forms. But what I coach leaders to do in those spaces, and or let me start with how that could look actually. What I've seen is often when you have very successful leaders who are playing multiple roles, whether that's navigating being the only one in spaces, or that's navigating being seen as the example of what's available to others if they're not represented in those roles, that you often take on this emotional labor of supporting people through the emotional weight of pipeline to get towards success while also catering to the bottom line of organizations and helping them thrive to meet their fullest potential.
Mm.
And so you sort of have this dual responsibility of supporting people emotionally while also leading the organization towards their greatest impact, which is often tied to the vision of that organization. And so, what I often do when I'm coaching leaders in these high stakes positions is to one, understand the role that you play in that space, right? So you may be the only one, you may be a person who's of high visibility in a role, and it could be seen as pressure, or you can go back to your leadership identity. Something that I coach to is really understanding the leader. What is your story?
Mm.
What is your what brought you into the organization that pushed you to actually want to lead in the first place, and then what are your non-negotiables. I sort of coined that your leadership DNA. And so once I um, coach other leaders on how to truly understand who they are as a leader through understanding their leadership DNA, then privilege of actually being in that spot and leading both from a place of being the only one sometimes, or the privilege of actually just leading people to a destination that they may not have seen for themselves previously. And it becomes an opportunity versus a burden. But what I so that's for the person individually to get to that space and that mindset. And then you have your team and your organization who you're surrounded by, who you also have to be conscious of how they're perceiving you, what it means to be in that position for them, while also leading the organization again. And so what I coach is collaborate without compromise. That's sort of my slogan there. I believe in collaboration. If you're not doing it together, you're not going to go as far. And I believe that the wave of the future is to be human centered, collaborating forward so that you could impact as many humans as possible in the work that you're doing. But in terms of that emotional state and that emotional labor that you spoke of earlier, I often coach leaders to do three specific things. First, I coach them to set cultural expectations up front. So, willing to take on versus what are you willing not to take on, and have that be clear as day. Walk into the room, because if you're not clear, your peers, your colleagues, your coworkers will set that clarity for you. And if it's not aligned, then it's the chaos of you trying to pull yourself out of that lack of clarity.
Yeah.
And so my advice is just to be clear up front. This is what I'm willing to stand for. This is what I'm not willing to take on. And this is what is the responsibility of my role, so that everyone's clear of that. So that's the first thing that I coach leaders to do. The second thing is to name what you won't tolerate. So as a leader, we're often expected to lead people to their full potential. And sometimes that's pushing people to where you see their edge, where they see their edge in their capacity to really lead and thrive in the workplace. Sometimes that comes with conflict, but you have to name up front what you're not willing to tolerate as a leader, whether that's you being silenced in the face of harm, whether that's you experiencing bias in any form, and just being clear, are you willing to address that or not? And I believe just being really clear about what you're not willing to tolerate. And that's something that I help people come to in their discovery of their leadership DNA. And then the final thing that I coach people through in understanding how to navigate that emotional labor that you often walk into is making it clear that you're not willing to be the translator of institutional gaps. And what I mean by that is there's often one person in the organization who is seen as the voice for certain issues within an organization. And it sometimes becomes pressure for people who are the only one in certain spaces in high profile roles. And what I often coach people in those spaces is to really be clear about what you're willing to translate versus what you're not. Because again, when you look at your own leadership DNA, you're there to create some insight and impact for the vision in a way that aligned with who you are as a leader. And sometimes these other things can become distractions. And so you have to get very what you're willing to tolerate versus what you're not. And that helps you, I think, step into your leadership in a way that's so powerful that becomes undeniable when you step into who you are.
Dominic, I would love for you, and not to call out anyone that you work with, but can you give us a specific example of a situation you've been in where it was something someone was willing to translate versus something that they were not? I'd love to audience to hear a specific example of what that may have looked like.
I talk about this actually in my book, again, The Authentic Edge, Leading Without Losing Yourself, which you can find on Amazon or any platform that sells books. But in chapter 5, I believe, leading when you're the only one, and chapter 11, owning your voice and owning your space, I talk about different examples of how this has shown up. One that comes to mind, which I shared that's not in the book, so you'll get extra from the book versus
Awesome.
ones that are not currently in the book. But what I have recently coached someone on is the emotional labor of code switching in the workspace and what that looks like to be in the board space versus what that looks like to in a leadership space within your organization, leading your coworkers who are the individual contributors to the organization. And there's the emotional weight of, or for this person, there was the emotional weight of leading the team destination around this particular example was around fundraising, and the team wanted to do something very specific that was aligned to their values and how they saw the core of the organization. And then there was a set of fundraiser or a set of funders connected to the board who wanted to see that fundraising event go a specific way. And there was the individual who was the center point of developing that entire event. And they were sort of torn between, do I hold the emotional weight of what the team wanted, or do I meet the needs of the board? And how
Yeah.
do I
And how do you
impact?
negotiate?
How do you negotiate and how do you impact the community in a way that everyone gets to be seen? So that's the example that I use, the emotional weight of both of those things. And what I coach that individual through is to actually create space where both the board and or not the entire board, because I know that that's challenging, but what I coach them to is to take the board chair and a lead person from their organization who they were leading, and figure out how do you collaborate in a way that the win-win gets to happen.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, so the example that was being presented was it's either this example or the other example. Oops, I lost my mic there. It was sort of this dichotomy of it's either this or it's that. And what I coach this individual around is, you as the leader, you get to see all the possibilities that no one is seeing. And you get to be the person who is driving the direction, but also creating the opportunities where people don't see it available. And sometimes that comes through addressing conflict. Sometimes that comes through just peeling back through the weeds to understand what else is on the table that we're not willing to discuss because of either fear, conflict, or whatever's in the way that's preventing us from being creative. And so my advice to that individual that I was coaching was to no longer code switch between both spaces. You get to be the same leader in the board space. You also get to be the same leader in your company. And you get to bring both of those people together in order to create a solution that creates the win-win from both sides. But it was through addressing those three things that I mentioned earlier of what are you not willing to tolerate? What are you willing to be the translator for, and what are you not willing to be? And part of that is bringing people together that actually have the conversation.
I love that specific example.
That was a
There's
great example.
two things there. I think for leaders, getting out of, I've heard it referred to as binary thinking.
Yeah.
What you just
Mhm.
said of either this
Or
or
that.
that, we have to either choose choice A or choice B. Get into
Yeah.
pathways thinking, that
Mhm.
there's multiple pathways, but then I absolutely, and it's a good reminder for us as well as leaders of, you don't have to solve all the problems. Bring the people together
Yeah.
Yeah.
with that and collaborate, because you're probably going to reach a destination that is better than either of the options you may have been wrestling with in that particular example.
Exactly. Agreed.
Yeah, and
I
especially when you're not on that path of that binary where it's just one option or the other, which
dichotomy
causes
thinking,
that
yeah.
stalemate
Mhm.
between the two groups, but really bringing people together to look at what are all of our possibilities and what are some things that we can create through some real collaboration.
So
Yeah, and something I don't think we do enough of, and I bring it into my coaching is we often don't bring the actual stakeholders that we're working with into the conversation, into the solution. And so, although I said bring both of those individuals together, it was centered around how do you actually bring the voice of the stakeholder in the room, the client, the person who you're serving, either your product or your experience or whatever the thing that your organization does. How do you center the client in that conversation so that they get to be a part of the innovation as well?
Well, and with that too, I mean, this comes right down to the core of what we do in building this culture of collaboration that we focus on the podcast is collaborating is messier, but the outcome is far greater.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It would be easy as a leader to just say, I'll make the choice, everyone, but you're probably not going to be further ahead than if you got a little bit messy, got into the weeds, and realized that, again, you've talked to this, that we might have to engage through cognitive thinking and some conflict in our thoughts to arrive at a destination we couldn't have got to without that
Totally
conversation.
agreed.
So when you think about collaboration, not just as a behavior, but a belief system, you talk about this. So why don't we finish off this conversation, Dominic, with what do you think it takes to embed, but then more importantly, sustain that system, that belief system over time, especially when we know teams are under pressure or facing potentially resistance? We'll be right back to continue this episode.
We constantly hear the question, what leadership books are people reading? Can anyone suggest a great book focused on strengthening teams and building robust cultures of collaboration?
Well, we've got you covered. We've compiled a list of 102 must-reads for school leaders directly from our bookshelves. No AI-generated list here. There are so many authors who have guided our work in collaborative response and continue to influence us as learners and leaders in education.
Access this curated collection of our top 102 books for building a powerful culture of collaboration by going to bit.ly/102reads. That's bit.ly/102reads.
We hope you enjoy this curated list. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, great question again. The sustainability is, I think, at the heart of most organizations right now. How do you sustain both with the shifting of the way in which the workforce is operating, but also how do you sustain a culture that is either working or shift ones that are not working so that they become sustainable? And so I think it's at the core of most of the organizations that I've definitely worked with and my peers of how they're describing the organization. So it's such a great question. What I think is a sustainable solution is, like I said at the top of this call, right, which is collaboration at the core and being human centered in that collaboration. So we have different systems that are in place, AI, different ways in which we could create efficiencies within organizations. But I believe that it's actually going to take human power to really make those systems work and to be in a space where we get to impact the world around us. And so when I think about sustainability in the workplace, I often coach, especially young leaders who are in, again, those mid-level positions going into senior level entry roles, or not entry roles, to really think about how do you impact the department next to you? How do you impact your peer next to you in a way that they get to win and you get to win at the same time? I don't think as workers in spaces that we collaborate enough. I think we do it a lot within our departments, within our teams, our direct teams, but we often don't make the time to actually do cross collaboration across departments and across different workflows. Because when you think about it, we're all working towards the same vision. And I believe that for anything to be sustainable, we have to all, one, be on the same page about what we're working towards. Has to be clear, and that comes from being a clear leader. But in order to really promote sustainability, I think it's about collaborating across department, across teams, so that you get to figure out how do you create efficiencies in your work while also creating win-wins across departments so that it doesn't stay siloed in the department that you're in or in your workflow that you're working on. And it gets to be embedded across departments so that it becomes sustainable. So that's always my solution is to do a lot of cross collaboration across departments.
Well, and truly creating that culture of collaboration when it's not, when we say that, it's not about each department doing the work that they need to do and
Mhm.
collaborating within them, but in order to create that true culture of collaboration, it needs to be all over in everything that you do.
We
Yeah.
often say that when somebody says, I'm working with my team, we want to be able to say, oh, I've been engaging with my teams
Yes.
because people should be on multiple teams or
Yeah,
opportunities to collaborate,
absolutely.
which is exactly what you're saying. So, Dominic, you've mentioned the book. Share it with us again, and can you share with us how could listeners get a hold of you or learn more about the amazing work that you are doing?
Yeah, and thank you again. It's such a pleasure to always talk about shared leadership ideas and principles. I'm always about how do we create win-win opportunities. The way that you could access my book, which is called The Authentic Edge: Leading Without Losing Yourself, you could purchase it on Amazon as a direct purchase or a direct access. And it's also available wherever you want to find books. But I would say that that's the direct route to get it quickest. You could also find me on LinkedIn. My handle on LinkedIn is Dominic C. George. And that's where you could discover my weekly newsletter that I send out on leadership opportunities for growth on a weekly basis. You could also discover my podcast, which is called Vision Leadership for Life, which I walk through again weekly tips on how do you elevate in the workplace in these changing moments in this changing time of organizations. And it's also where you could just directly sign up for a consultation if you're, or a discovery call rather, if you're interested in executive coaching or want to work with me within your organization specifically.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank
Yeah.
you so much,
This has
Dominic.
been an absolute pleasure, Dominic, to be able to connect and have you share your thoughts. Yeah, you're speaking our language. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful to be here. And thank you for having me on your podcast as well. I'm excited for all the ways, again, that you can continue to impact not only school communities, teachers, but just the world of education. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
Wishing you all
Take
the
care.
best. Okay, so this is one of the reasons I love through this podcast. We connect with some really powerful, inspiring
Mm,
educational leaders. Of
yeah,
course, that's our background, but I love engaging with those outside of the
yeah,
education industry
yeah.
to really look at
Impacting
some of the
business.
crossover as well. And I
Hmm.
think this also goes to what Dominic had said of if we stay, he talked about staying
Yeah,
siloed in your
yeah,
department.
yeah.
I also wonder if you stay siloed in your industry,
Industry.
if we don't, if we gain more by collaborating
Yeah,
with those outside of our particular industry as well. So I
yeah.
love being able to engage with those outside of education.
There's always so much to
Yeah.
learn, and the work that he's doing definitely is a parallel to the work that we do, and really focusing in on that collaborative
Yeah.
culture.
So you and I have heard the terms clarity and
Yeah,
trust
yeah.
over and
So
over and
many
over
times.
on this podcast, but I loved the statements he had that collaboration without clarity is chaos,
Yeah,
which it absolutely is.
yeah.
We've all been in situations where it feels like we're working, 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 but not
Not
really
getting
sure
anywhere.
why.
Hmm.
And then the other collaboration without trust is theater. And like that
Hmm.
idea of you put on your mask. Well,
Yeah.
you got to take off that mask if we're going to start building trust and then
Hmm.
getting beyond just playing nicely with one another to
Yeah.
truly collaborating and knowing collaboration is it by its very nature brings discomfort. It absolutely does. And without trust, then you're just all playing nice
Hmm.
here.
Yeah, and I like that visual that creates
Yeah.
around wearing a mask and performing and in the theater, like all of those terms he was using throughout our conversation, but that idea that leaders sometimes feel like they have to perform and or wear a mask, and what we're actually trying to do is to be authentic, truly
Yeah.
authentic and be ourselves so that we can create those teams with trust and opportunities to learn from each other. And that doesn't come when people wear masks.
Yeah. Well, and I think him providing that example of, are you really clear on your non-negotiables?
Yeah.
Are you really clear on your expectations? Are
Hmm.
you really clear on what I loved how he said it, the what you're willing to translate and what you're
Yeah.
not willing to translate? I think that's critical for us to think about leaders who are trying to build that culture of collaboration. Again, it comes back to clarity, but
Hmm.
if you're not clear, then how can we expect our teams
Well,
to
and
have
clear about your own
clear?
leadership. Like I really appreciated the fact that he was pointing to that reflective
Yeah,
practice.
grounding your identity was
Yeah,
the
and that
terminology he
really
used.
understanding who you are as a leader so that you can be as authentic as you possibly can. And when we don't spend that time, and we often don't
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in reflection, but when we don't spend that time, we don't get the results in the end that we're hoping for,
Hmm.
which is which is difficult. Another thing that he brought up was the fact that most leaders actually learn their leadership skills from someone else. And when they go into the leadership role, they really think about replicating what they've seen.
Yeah.
And that's not always the best path
Hmm.
because, of course, again, it's about, who you are, and every leader is unique in their own personality and their own circumstances. And so we want to be able to really get to that authenticity.
And I think this is a great reminder. And through reflection, I realize through my journey, as well as a leader, that this has been reflective as being comfortable, that you're going to learn as you go
Yeah.
and communicate that out to others. I mean, that's sharing vulnerability, but that I'm going to learn as a leader. I'm going to make mistakes, and I need your help to guide. In fact, we're all going to help one another. I think
Mhm.
when, as a leader, you can start at that place,
Yeah.
it starts to build trust. And again, we'll come back to his key term of being authentic.
Yeah, and you know what? I just came across some research from Joe Bowler from Stanford University, and she talks about the brain research around making mistakes or when you get things right.
Hmm.
And when you make mistakes, your synapses are firing and and really building new connections because you're trying to figure out what went wrong and what should I have done or what could I have done differently. And then she said in that study, when they studied people who were just getting things correct, then there was no activity in the brain at all.
Okay, well, that's great news. I must have a lot of brain activity then because
All the mistakes we
made a lot
make.
of mistakes. So, uh, once again, would love to thank our guest. That's Dominic George for joining the podcast and sharing his experience. Please make sure check out the notes. We're going to put links to the book as well as to a LinkedIn profile so that you can join the newsletter as well as this podcast as well. Please, we encourage you to reach out if you're interested in a further conversation. As always, we'd love to end off with two requests. First, join or share our mailing list at jlinsiders.com to receive weekly content that we put out and resources that we know you're going to find valuable. Second, we'd love it if you could like, share, review, or subscribe to help ensure someone else who needs to hear this discussion with Dominic has a greater chance of finding it. Finally, don't hesitate to reach out at questions@jigsawlearning.ca if you have a question, a future topic you'd love for us to explore, or if you'd just like to connect. We'd love to hear from you. Wishing you all the best as you endeavor to build a culture of collaboration in your organization.
See you soon.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.